You asked God to heal your soul, but perhaps you didn't realize what might happen after that prayer. Because before bringing the peace you so desire, God may begin to reveal what you've spent years trying to hide. Fears, wounds, memories, and emotions you thought you had already overcome. What if what you're feeling now isn't the end of your struggle, but the beginning of a healing that God is silently carrying out? There's a part of this process that almost no one talks about. When you ask God to heal your soul, some wounds may seem more intense, certain feelings may return, and situations you previously tolerated may begin to bother you. But does this mean you're getting worse? Or is there something happening behind this change that you can't yet see? Stay with me, because later on we'll discover how to discern this. What if, after asking God to heal your soul, you began to feel things you thought you had overcome? What if that prayer for peace, strength, and restoration didn't bring immediate relief, but caused old wounds, fears, and hidden emotions to resurface? Have you ever experienced this? Perhaps you thought your faith was weakening when, in fact, God was touching precisely what you had learned to hide. Emotional healing doesn't always begin when the pain disappears. Sometimes it begins when we finally manage to see it before God. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover may change how you understand this phase. What if God isn't ignoring what you feel, but finally bringing to light what needs healing? And perhaps as you listen to all this, some part of your own story is coming to mind. Maybe you too have asked God for healing and, instead of feeling immediate relief, have begun to perceive emotions that have been hidden for a long time. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment about what has touched your heart the most so far, because your experience may be exactly the word that someone else needed to find today. And if this message is speaking to you, like this video. This simple gesture helps the message reach someone who is also facing a silent battle. Subscribe to the channel to continue following content that helps us see our emotions in the light of the Bible and find hope even in phases that seem difficult to understand. Because when we share what we are experiencing, we discover that we don't have to go through all this alone, and perhaps there is something even deeper happening within you. Perhaps you've spent so much time trying to be strong that you haven't even realized how many emotions you've learned to hide. Hurt, fear, guilt, anxiety, loneliness, resentment, everything has been kept in the background of your life until it seemed like it was part of who you are. Then you pray, "God, heal my soul," hoping to feel peace immediately. But suddenly what was hidden begins to appear, and you wonder, why am I feeling this way now if I asked God to make me feel better? Perhaps because healing isn't simply about ceasing to feel pain. Sometimes it's about finally having the courage to look at that pain honestly and allowing God to transform what you've spent years trying to hide. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there's a hidden truth in this journey that can change the way you interpret what you're feeling. Comment below, "God is showing me what needs to be healed." And perhaps it is precisely here that the pain becomes even more confusing. You began to see your wounds. You tried to be honest with God, but the answer you expected didn't come. You prayed for peace, asked for guidance, sought strength, and yet you continued to feel that emptiness. It is at this moment that many begin to think, is God really listening to me? Perhaps you have already experienced this. Silence can cause the mind to create stories that faith never confirmed. You begin to interpret the waiting as rejection, the delay as abandonment, and the absence of answers as if God had withdrawn. But the Bible shows that there are times when God works without making a sound, and what seems like silence may be happening behind the scenes of your transformation. Not every answer from God comes as an immediate change in circumstances. Some begin as a silent change within you. And when your mindset changes, your decisions begin to change, your perception changes, and even what previously controlled your emotions loses its power. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, Because there is a difference between God being silent and God being absent, and understanding this difference can completely change the way you go through this phase. Perhaps you're realizing that the greatest battle isn't happening around you, but within your own mind. After asking God to heal your soul, thoughts that once seemed normal begin to grab your attention. Nothing will change. I'll never overcome this. God has forgotten me. Maybe I'm alone in this fight. And when these thoughts repeat themselves, they begin to influence your emotions, your decisions, and even the way you see God. This is where we need discernment, because not every thought deserves to be believed simply because it appeared in your mind. Spiritual warfare also involves what you accept as truth about yourself, your history, and what God is doing. The Bible calls us to renew our minds, because a weary mind can interpret silence as abandonment and difficulty as defeat. Perhaps the problem isn't just what you're facing, but the story your mind is telling about it. And when this truth begins to become clear, you realize that not all pain means your faith is failing. Perhaps you are suffering and thinking you should be stronger in your faith. But feeling fear, sadness, or weariness doesn't mean God has left you. You can pray and still cry. You can trust in God and still have difficult days. Faith doesn't mean the absence of emotions. It means learning to bring those emotions to God instead of hiding them. Perhaps this pain isn't proof that you're distant, but an opportunity to realize how much you need to depend on Him. And when you stop fighting what you feel and begin to surrender it to God, something inside you begins to change. Perhaps that's exactly where true transformation begins. Perhaps one of the hardest things is accepting that you can't control everything. You ask God to heal your soul, but you still try to control time, answers, people, and the outcome. And that's exhausting. Sometimes healing begins when you finally say, God, I don't understand everything, but I surrender. Surrendering isn't giving up. It's trusting that God can work even when you can't see the way. And perhaps at that moment, you'll discover that what you were trying to control was precisely what you needed to place in His hands. When God begins to transform your soul, some things that once seemed normal no longer fit with the person you are becoming. Certain habits, thoughts, expectations, and even some relationships may begin to weigh on you differently. This doesn't mean judging people or making impulsive decisions, but learning to recognize what steals your peace, weakens your faith, and keeps you stuck in the past. True transformation also involves letting go. There are burdens you've carried for so long that you've begun to believe they were part of your identity. But God doesn't just want to alleviate your pain. He wants to teach you to walk in a different way. And when you begin to leave behind what you no longer need to carry, something inside you begins to breathe again. One of the most profound signs of healing isn't when all problems disappear, but when you begin to react differently to them. What once robbed you of your peace no longer controls your emotions in the same way. You begin to think before you act, to surrender before trying to control, and to trust even without having all the answers. The wound may still exist, but it no longer determines your decisions. That is transformation. God isn't just changing what happens around you. He's working on the person you become as you go through this phase. And there's something even more important you need to understand about this change. The battle you face has no power to define who you are. Don't confuse what you're feeling with who you are. Fear may be present, but you are not your fear. Sadness may be part of this moment, but it doesn't define your story. Tiredness may have arrived, but it doesn't mean you've lost your strength. In God, your identity doesn't depend on the phase you're going through. The war happening inside your mind has no authority to determine your worth. Therefore, stop calling weakness what God may be using to teach you to depend more on Him. Your story is bigger than this pain, and this phase will not have the final say. And it is precisely when you begin to see this that healing takes on a much deeper meaning. Perhaps you asked God to heal your soul, hoping everything would change at once. But now you're beginning to realize that healing can also happen through small changes within you. The way you think, react, choose, and face what once seemed impossible. God doesn't ignore your pain. He works on it. It doesn't mean all the answers have arrived, but that you no longer need to face this journey in the same way. The wound that once controlled your emotions can become part of the testimony of what God has transformed. And when you look back, you realize that the battle that seemed to be destroying you was also revealing a strength, a faith, and a new identity that was still being formed. Your healing doesn't need to happen before everyone's eyes. There are things that God begins in silence, within the heart, before anyone can perceive the result. And perhaps it is precisely in this silence that you are beginning to understand what God wanted to show you from the beginning. If this message resonated with a part of your life that you can't quite explain, continue walking with us. Here, we will look at our emotions, our struggles, and our moments of silence in the light of the Bible, seeking to see God even in the phases we cannot yet understand.